This is the Defiled series, going into part 2, and as I've already discussed with everybody during part 1, offense leads to unforgiveness, unforgiveness leads to bitterness. So if we really deal with offense, we'll have an easier time just dealing with the unforgiveness and the bitterness that comes afterwards, or hopefully we'll preempt it. And again, we'll teach on how to work our way back from when you discover that you've been bitter about something or you're holding an unforgiveness, working back towards removing that, one brick at a time. So I have to continue with offense because that's the core of this, that's the heart of everything that we're talking about. The word in the Greek New Testament for offense is scandalizo. It means to put a stumbling block or impediment in the way which another may trip or fall. And then we get to the word scandalon, which is a root word of scandalizo, and that Greek word is literally the movable stick or trigger of a trap stick. Literally that piece within the trap that needs to be triggered like on a mouse trap, just that little tab that we put the peanut butter on to catch the mouse, and then the whole thing's set in motion. It's just a small little thing. So I want to look at a couple things today, looking in Matthew 18, verses 1 through 10. Jesus is talking about a whole bunch of things with his disciples, and I pointed out before that when we're talking about offense, it's rooted in pride. And here's, as well as pride, here's another thing that happens or that occurs when we're talking about offense. And I'll say this at the beginning and then we'll read through it and I'll point it out again. If you're offended at something, the offense lies within you. If you're bothered about something, it's within you. You're the one having the problem. Now that doesn't, or being mean to you or something like that. But if you're balanced within yourself, ultimately, and I'm not saying we're all perfect, I'm not trying to go there, but ultimately you can get to the place where you can overlook any offense because it doesn't reside within you. And we're going to go through this. Matthew 18, verse 1, this is King James because they use the word offend in verse 6, and so I wanted to focus on that. But it says, at that same time the disciples came unto Jesus and saying, who is the greatest in the kingdom? And again, the reason I pointed out the pride is because that's right there. They're trying to figure out, hey, what's the hierarchy? Who's really in charge here, Lord? Jesus called a little child to him, and he set him in the midst of them. And he said, verily I say unto you, unless you be converted and become as a little child, you shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. Whosoever shall humble himself. So again, reinforcing what I just said about the pride. They were coming to him in pride, and he said, whosoever shall humble himself as a little child, the same is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whosoever shall receive such a one in my name receiveth me, King James again. Verse 6, but whosoever shall offend, and that's that word scandalizo. Whosoever shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, it would be better for him that a millstone be hanged around his neck and that he be drowned in the depths of the sea. Woe unto the world because of offenses, because of scandalizo. For it must needs be that offenses come, but woe to the man through whom the offenses come. And I'm going to get to this next verse, but I want you to see this, how important it is. If you on the surface, just reading those verses, you would say, okay, it just means that if I offend somebody or if I hurt somebody or if I mess with somebody, that's on me and I've got to deal with it. And it would be better if I don't offend somebody. But if we keep going into verse 8, we would see there's a lot more to it. Jesus says right from this idea of who shall offend one of these little ones who believe in me. And then he says, woe to the world because of offenses. He literally says the offenses have to come. They've got to come. They're not going to, you can't get by them. They're going to happen. And he said, but woe to the man by whom they come. Now, why would he say woe to the man by whom they come? Just because he's casting him, he's saying he needs a millstone tied around his neck to be cast in the sea? No. He says it in verse 8 and 9. He says, wherefore, if thy hand or thy foot offend thee, and I looked these words up just to make sure, he's saying if your foot's offending you, if your hand's offending you, it's better if you cut it off and cast it away from you it would be better for you to enter into life halted or maimed, meaning missing a limb, rather than to have 2 hands or 2 feet to be cast into eternal fire or everlasting fire. And then he says, if your eye offends you, pluck it out, cast it away from you. It's better that you enter into life with 1 eye rather than have 2 eyes to be cast into hell. Take heed that you despise not one of these little ones, for I say to you that their angels in heaven do always behold the face of the Father which is in heaven. The point being here, Jesus says, look, woe to you if offenses come. If you offend one of these little ones, it'd be better if you have a millstone tied around your neck and thrown in the sea. But then he goes on to say, the reason you're causing offense in somebody, if you cause offense, is because the offense is within you. It's because it's living within you. You're looking, what it means is simply this, and you may have heard this phrase, it's pretty common in the world. Hurt people hurt people. Wounded people wound other people. People with a stumbling block within them cause other people to stumble. So if you are affecting other people negatively, that's because you've allowed negativity to live in you. And that's what this whole series is talking about. Defiled. Dealing with offense, unforgiveness, and bitterness, and saying, listen, if you got strife and turmoil around you, it starts from right here. You got to deal with what's inside first. You got to take these brick walls that we've built of being offended and hurt and wounded by all these things and start to process and deal with them. We always want to look for justice. Well, that person hurt me and I want them to pay for it, and we want to deal with it from that aspect, and we don't realize that we have to deal with it from the aspect of if I'm not a whole person, I can't function at all. No matter what somebody else has done to me, we're going to be hurt. We're going to be wounded. We're going to, in fact, Solomon wrote in Proverbs that the wounds of a friend can be trusted. So you're going to even be wounded by your friends. Do you think it's a pleasant thing? Simple little thing. You ever seen anybody sharpen knives? My boys like to sharpen knives. They like to get hunting knives and really nice knives, and they like to sharpen them. Do you realize what's really going on there? They're literally taking off material in order to get to a sharp edge. Over time, if you've ever seen somebody that's had a pocket knife all their life and they've sharpened it on a regular basis, the blade is much thinner, or the width of it is smaller. It's less wide as when they bought it because they've taken off material every time they sharpen that blade. Okay, well, it talks about that iron sharpens iron as one man sharpens another. So literally, if you're sharpening somebody, you're taking part of it off. You're removing part of the material when you do that. So that's what this is talking about. And Jesus says to his disciples, listen, it'd be better if you hacked your hand off if it's offending you and enter into life missing a hand than to go into everlasting fire with both hands. What was he saying? If your hand offends you, it's going to offend somebody else. And he's using parts of the body as the metaphor. If your eye offends you, if looking at something bothers you, it'd be better to take that eye out so that you don't cause somebody else to be offended. And that's why he says in verse 6 or verse 7, woe to the man by whom the offense comes. Why? Because he's the one that's in the most miserable place. He's the one that's the most affected. He's the one that's dealing with the most things. He said it'd be better for him. We think of it as punishment, don't we? We look at it and we think of it'd be better for him to have a millstone tied around his neck and cast in the sea. That's not what he was taught. He wasn't talking about punishment, but that's what we've been told, isn't it? That's what we've assumed. It'd be better that he be punished by having a millstone tied around his neck and thrown in the sea. No, Jesus was saying he's the type of person that if he's causing a child to be offended, he's a miserable person, and it'd be better that if his life was over. You ever met somebody that's a child abuser or a child molester or something like that, that they're habitual, that they're the most messed up, miserable people you want to meet? Not you want to meet, but that you would encounter. There's so much turmoil, so much grief within them that they just live a miserable existence. Not to go down that road, but to quote a movie, there's a movie out there, And one of the lines is, they're talking about a criminal in the movie, and one of the other characters says, points out to the character, he said that it's difficult, he says, times of levity or peace are actually torment for that person. They're so full of anger, so full of bitterness, so full of rage, that times of peace and levity are actually tormenting to them. They can't handle not having some kind of conflict around them, so they conjure it up. And I'm going to tell you that our world is full of this. And if we don't choose to break free from that, our lives will be full of it. The world is full of people who invent conflict for themselves. If they can't find conflict, they invent conflict. Our government is doing it right now throughout the world. We have to go and find an enemy, invent an enemy. We'll send our troops in there secretly to pretend to be the enemy. And it's not just our government that's done it, it's been done all along. In order for the Germans to have a justification to invade Poland, they dressed their troops up in Polish outfits, infiltrated Poland, snuck in there, and then attacked Germany. Why? Because they wanted an enemy. They wanted conflict so that they would have a pretext to go in and conquer somebody else. And these are the things that we all are capable of doing, and all have I can guarantee you that we've all done it in one way or another, to where the things within us are driving us, they're pushing us, they're forcing us into situations. We're offending other people because the offense, the stumbling is within us. We're tripping over things ourselves, and then we're putting it in other people's face. Now I'll give this example, and you'll have to deal with it. You'll have to deal with it. I know people that have a problem with God. I'm almost 40 years old. I've dealt with a lot of people that have a problem with God. And you know what usually happens is, they try to influence the people around them to have a problem with God. I know people that have a problem with any number of things. They don't like this, they don't like that. Here's a simple one. Here's a simple one we can all relate to. You ever met somebody that absolutely loves a certain vehicle type, a manufacturer? Ford or Chevy, or what do they try to do to the people around them? They try to cast aspersions or beat up on that, and they say, you drive one of those? Those are junk. And they say, I haven't had any problems with the vehicle that I drive. Yeah, but it's a such and such type of car, isn't it? Yeah. I haven't had any, light maintenance, things like, yeah, but those are junk. What are they doing? They've got something within them, and they're trying to influence somebody else the same way. What are they trying to do? They're trying to put a stumbling block in front of somebody. Now, that's a simple little thing, seems almost insignificant, but it gets to the root of what I'm talking about. If you're offended, or you're causing other people to be offended, the offense lives in you. How do we move past that? How do we dig that up? That's what this whole series is about. I've got to learn the little tools, the little mechanisms. And I've said this before, it's just the power of confession. That's the simplicity of it. It's very simple. I'll keep repeating it throughout the whole series, is the power of confession. Once you realize, hey, I'm causing somebody else to stumble, or I'm stumbling at looking at this, you go, I confess offense. Or I confess unforgiveness. Or I confess bitterness. And I'll get into what unforgiveness and bitterness is in real detail. But the point is, you speak out of your mouth freedom over you. There are things that I could ask for a show of hands, and I can almost guarantee you that everybody here could point to something that they endured this past week since I taught the first part, where you had an opportunity or did get offended. Either you had an opportunity to get offended and you overlooked it, or you did get offended. I can probably, off the top of my head, list about 4 different things specifically that were huge that just jumped at me. And they weren't even given to me, shared with me, to necessarily cause offense. But they were things that I instantly, within myself, they bothered me. And then I had to process it, and I had to overlook an offense to promote love. And I like I said, I could ask for a show of hands and how many people have dealt with that this week, where they go, yeah, somebody really, they got my number. So let's look at a couple of these words here so that we can see this. In the word scandalize, according to the 1828 Webster's dictionary, it says to offend by some action supposed criminal. And then the second definition is to reproach, to disgrace, to defame. And so I looked up the word reproach because it's in one of my other definitions over here. And it says to censure in terms of oblivium, I don't know how to say that word, or contempt. We'll just stick with contempt. To censor in terms of contempt. The second definition says to charge with a fault in severe language. To charge with a fault. And I like that one, and I like the fact that it's put in there about reproach, because the etymology, one of the etymologies of offense comes down to that idea of reproach. When we look at scandalize, it says to reproach, and scandal even means even more, to cause to reproach. The idea of reproach meaning you're charging with a fault. When you charge somebody else with a fault and say, you've got this fault within you, however we term it, however we say it, what we're doing is we're literally pointing, just as somebody, they say, you point one finger at somebody else, you've got three pointing back at you. What you say about somebody else, here's a good thing to write down or get it in your heart and mind. Somebody else says more about you than them. What you say about somebody else says more about you than it does them. Now, a lot of times we can put that in a negative context, okay? But there are other times that you can say this absolutely in a positive context. Do you look for the good in other people? What are you saying about somebody else? When people ask me about other people, many of the people in this room can testify how I respond. Somebody asks me, why is somebody doing something? Well, you know what? They're dealing with this in their life. They're going through a situation, and the Lord's really working on it and bringing that to the surface so they can deal with it, so you need to operate in love towards them. What does that say about me? Say I'm looking for the purpose, the love, in everybody else, and I'm trying to lead by example in that. The same is true on the opposite side, the negative side. Well, you're just, this, and this. We get into it. We get into conflicts and arguments with each other, and what do? We start pointing out the negatives. We start pointing out the faults. We're bringing a reproach, and it says more about us. It says about our heart motivation. Anybody here ever been afraid of being hurt? Then you're operating out of fear and hurt. And what happens? You end up hurting people and causing them to be afraid of you or have fear within themselves and then be bound up by that. That's why it says it'd be better to have a millstone. I mean, think about it. You've got somebody that is probably through ignorance most of the time, purposefully though, in ignorance, hurting other people. That's what Jesus is talking about. It'd be better that they be cast into hell. He's saying, you know what? You need to start cutting this stuff off. Figuratively, cut it off. Otherwise, you're going to end up in the absolute miserable place because you've lived in the temporal miserable place for so long. You got to work on this stuff. And how many, once you've heard this, once I've gone through this over and over again, how many times can we see opportunity of offense now? How much more visual does it become to you, or obvious does it become to you that, that's something I'm tripping over? Just think of it in that terminology. It's to put a stumbling block or impediment in the way upon which another may trip or fall. Okay, that's scandalizo. Scandalon, the movable stick, the trigger. Okay, but when we get to what Jesus is talking about, he says not only if you're causing somebody else to stumble over something that you've put in their way, realize you put it in your own way first. Or, I'll give the caveat, somebody else put it in our way. You ever met a child that's prejudiced towards somebody else of another race or something like that? I can almost guarantee you that there was either an offense or a parent that brought them up in that same mentality. And so they have this unnatural hatred of somebody from another race who's done, that person may have done absolutely nothing to them personally. Yet they have this unnatural hatred of that person. And they spread that around. You ever met somebody that can't help themselves but tear other people down? They can't talk about anybody else except in... It's just amazing to the people that I've come across in my life that will say, yeah, I know so-and-so. Yeah, you know, they're a pretty good person, but you know what? I was around them one time and they did such and such. And I'm like, why are you... No, I don't want to hear that. Like, well, it's truth. I mean, it actually happened. Okay, it actually happened. But I choose to overlook an offense. I choose to promote love. I don't want to hear about the faults of somebody else. I just read that. To charge with a fault in severe language. I don't want to do that. I want to look for the best in people, bring it out, and you know what? By bringing out the best in people, whatever it is, whatever you're drawing upon, you'll cause the negativity to be dealt with properly. It'll be dealt with properly. If you're just going to focus on the negative. It's like what they do in church for so long. We've been around it. We're going to deal with sin from sin. I'm going to teach you how not to sin. That doesn't work. Anything that's not of faith is sin. And Paul said in Galatians, I say to you, live by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the sinful nature. Just live by the Spirit, and it'll get taken care of. Build other people up. Speak positive things in their life, and guess what? The negative stuff starts to filter out. It starts to get dealt with. You're removing the burden. Jesus talked about the Pharisees. He came to them and he says, you heap heavy loads on men's back, and you refused to lift a finger to help them carry it. Amen. You want to put all this stuff on people. Do this, follow this rule, take care of this. You better be doing this. I've literally seen people, Jace, that tell people legalistically, you better be loving somebody. You go, how do you do legalism and love, man? You can't do that. But we've got to get this understanding in us. We've got to see these things because we've all been hurt. We've all been wounded. We've wounded ourselves. We've disappointed ourselves. So when somebody else disappoints us, we start pounding on them. You're not living up to my expectation of you. Well, why are you beating me up about it? Because I don't live up to my expectation of myself. So I got to come after you and attack you. That's one of these, when I got into one of these words, it literally says to bring an attack. Where was it at? Offend, it was scandalize, or was it scandal? Scandal, there it is. Scandal coming from the word, it really goes into the Greek in the 1828 Webster's Dictionary, and it says, in the Greek, the word signifies a stumbling block, something against which a person impinges or which causes him to fall. And it says, to bring a deliberate attack, to defame, is one of the definitions. To bring a deliberate attack, to defame, to go after somebody. It's a stumbling block within yourself. But instead of dealing with ourselves, you know why? Because it's messy in there. And it's easier for us to go after somebody else than it is to sit down and work through our own issues. You know why? Because it takes what I've been saying. There's a brick, here's a brick, here's a brick, here's a brick. We've moved bricks around here. Is it fun? The whole driveway full of paver bricks. There's still remnants of the bricks laying around. Does anybody here want to move them? Anybody have this just great desire, let's get the bricks moved? No. We just want them done with and moved out of the way, right? Same with our lives. Thank you, Lord. It seems more times we'd rather throw a brick at somebody else than take them out. The only way we want to take them out of the wall is if we can whip them at somebody. That's what's going on here in dealing with offense. We're causing others to stumble because of what's inside of us. Jesus dealt with a couple of his disciples in Mark chapter 9, and I'll just give you the summary of it. They said, "Teacher," and this was John, supposedly the beloved disciple. He says, "Teacher, we saw a man driving out demons in your name, and we told him to stop because he was not one of us." Wait a minute. Here's a person out there in Jesus' name casting out devils, and because they weren't part of the group, they told him to stop. And one of my notes here that I wrote in here was, they saw something they didn't understand, and the reason for offense which leads them to conflict was that they misunderstood and had wrong motives. They didn't understand what they were seeing. Their heart motive, they're like, wait a minute. We're the disciples, man. Who's this guy? We saw somebody casting out devils, Jesus, in your name, but he wasn't part of the group here. So we told him to knock it off. He said, "Hey, man, you ain't part of our group. You better stop that." And Jesus' response is, "Don't stop him. No one who does a miracle in my name in the next moment can say something bad about me. Whoever's not against us is for us." Now, that's completely opposite of the mentality of some government people right now. They say if you're not with us, then you are against us. Jesus said, if they're not against us, then they are with us. He said it from the opposite side. He said, we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt. Unless they're attacking me, I'm going to assume they're my friend. And even if they do attack me, I might still have to say the wounds of a friend can be trusted. They can be relied upon. Just like iron sharpening iron. I'm going to take off a little bit of this edge to get you sharper. Well, that hurts. You're using this special stone and oil just to scrape off part of me. Yep. But when you get done, you'll be sharper. You'll be that much more effective in what you're doing. Anybody ever used a dull knife to try to cut stuff? It's annoying. You want to just throw that thing. So you got to take the thing and you got to sharpen it real quick, and then you got to wash it because you don't want to get metal shavings in the meat. You see what I'm saying? So Jesus dealt with his disciples. He's trying to tell them, listen, and he goes into this same thing. And this is Mark chapter 9. In verse 41, he says, "I tell you the truth, anyone who gives a cup of water in my name because he belongs to Christ will certainly not lose his reward. But if anyone causes one of these little ones in me to sin," scandalizo, "it would be better for him that he be thrown into the sea with a large millstone tied around his neck." He gets to the same root. Why? Because if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It'd be better that you enter life maimed than with two hands to go into hell where the fire does not go out. If your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. It'd be better to enter life crippled than to have 2 feet and be thrown into hell. And if your eye, pluck it out. It'd be better to go into the kingdom with one eye than go thrown into hell where the worm dies not. He just keeps hammering this idea. Listen, if you're causing somebody else to stumble, that means you're stumbling within. And here's the biggest thing that I have to get to. The most important thing out of all this idea of offense, and that is that Jesus is the rock of offense. He is the stumbling stone. In Romans chapter 9, it says this, that Jesus is the stumbling stone. In chapter 9, verse 32, they stumbled over the stumbling stone. For as it is written, "See, I lay in Zion a stone that causes men to stumble and a rock that makes them fall. And the one who trusts in him will never be put to shame." So here's the concept. If you're coming up against the rock, you're going to trip over it. If you're standing on the rock, you're firm in your foundation. So when you find yourself stumbling, and then that's pretty much the exact phraseology that Paul heard when the Lord came to him on the road to Damascus. He said, "Isn't it hard to kick against the pricks? Isn't it hard to kick against the goads?" He was saying, you're beating on something you can't beat on. You're only going to hurt yourself. Anybody ever punched a brick wall? I have, out of frustration and anger many years ago. You know what it did? Nothing to the wall. It was kind of a fruitless thing. All it did was hurt my hand. The wall didn't care. But out of my frustration and anger, that's what I did. I lashed out at the wall. I didn't want to hit anything else, you know. So I punched the wall. There are so many things in our life that we do the same thing with. We stumble over these things that the Lord's trying to get our attention and say, listen, I don't want you to live in misery. I don't want you to carry around the pain and the hurt and the fear and the anxiety that's been put upon you. What I want is to set you free of that stuff and then teach you how to show other people to be set free, because the world is full of pain and misery. Why is the world full of pain and misery? I just did 3 videos on YouTube about why bad things happen. And it's one of the hardest things to share with people, because I have to say it's what we allow. It's what we allow to happen that causes the pain and misery in the world. People say, well, why did God allow this to happen? Why did God allow that to happen? Why did the people that were standing there that were capable of doing something not do anything? There's atrocities going on. If you look at any real crimes and horrible things that are out there in the world, you'll find it's a very small minority that are perpetuating it, and there is a silent majority that are allowing it to continue. Do you know, if the people of America get pushed too far, the less than 1% of the people that run our government will have no chance and no opportunity to stop us from restoring this country to freedom? There's less than... I get up here and say things about our government and things that are wrong. It's less than 1% of our population that's actually running those things. All the dictators, if I said this on the video and I had to be very sensitive about it because I don't want to hurt people, but if those in Germany had stood together against the Nazi Party, they would have not succeeded, because the Nazi Party was the minority in numbers alone. If those in the camps, the concentration camps, had stood up, they outnumbered them 10 to 30 or 40 to 1 per guard. Just overwhelming force would have stopped the genocide. But it's hard to say that because you don't want to hurt people even more. They're trying to find an answer. Why this? Why that? Why this? And the reason most people say that is because there's something stumbling within them. There's an inadequacy within them of, why am I not doing something in my general area to make people better? So I'm going to start pointing a finger and say, why is this not? Why is this? Why? We want to go, why is God allowing this to happen? Instead of saying, you know, why do I allow the things to happen in my life that I allow to happen? Why do I allow myself to be miserable when there's opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to be happy, to find joy within the moment, to find joy within the people that are around me? You know why? Because it's easier. It's not better. It's easier. It's easier to be negative. It's easier to be hurt and hurt other people. It's easier to lash out. You know, unless you train a dog, their natural tendency is to become fearful and motivated out of that fear. They'll operate out of that fear. They don't bark because if you train a dog, and I had trained dogs growing up as a kid, they only barked when they didn't recognize a vehicle or a person. They'd say, that person doesn't look right to me, and they're in my yard, and my owner has trained me to recognize that, and the dog would bark. So we knew on the farm that if the dog barked, there was somebody here that wasn't supposed to be, or somebody that was unfamiliar that we didn't know. But if they knew somebody, they might bark in happiness on an off occasion, just hi. But most of the time, they just acknowledged the presence of the person and went back to being a dog. They were trained. But have you ever come across dogs, I think we all have, that are just operate out of a lack of training and have fear? What do? They spaz out on anything. The little chihuahuas that, yeah, the little chihuahuas that are afraid. The one dog he's afraid of his own food dish. Bandit. He's afraid of his own food dish. So he's starving half the time because he won't go over and eat because he's afraid of his food dish. They got to figure out ways to feed him because he's afraid. And there's a reflection. There's a lesson to learn in that for us. It's easy. It's like a default mechanism to live in fear. It's a default mechanism to live in pain. It's a default mechanism to live in hurt. It takes effort to be at peace within yourself. It takes effort to deal with these things. But the benefit, man, I could start naming off hockey players or just any number of sports players. And you know the ones that are at the top of the sport, that are the people that are known to be the best in those things? You would be amazed at what they do to keep themselves in shape, to be at the top of their game. It just doesn't come naturally. Yeah, they've got natural ability, but they took natural ability and combined it with hard work to be the best. I was amazed. And I've mentioned these guys before. Chris Chelios played till he was 48 years old. He took 2 weeks off in the summer and then went immediately back to training. The guy used to ride his stationary bike in the sauna. He had an extreme training regimen. Pavel Datsyuk, one of the most phenomenal skaters right now, scorers, just all around complete players. Okay? He stays after the mandatory practices and just practices different shots. And if you've ever watched him shoot a goal, it's some of the most amazing, it's just pretty stuff. Where he'll come back, put the puck between his legs, shoot it through his, just crazy stuff. That's because he just practices and practices and practices and practices. Yeah, he's got natural ability, but he puts in the hard work. Michael Jordan, I don't think many people would argue that he was one of the best basketball players ever. 6 championships under his leadership. 2 back-to-back, 3, and they took 2 years off and then did 3 more championships all in a row. He used to stay after the court and just practice shot after shot after shot after shot after shot. Saw a documentary on him how his parents said that he would just go outside just after school and he'd come home, eat dinner, and then go out and just shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot until he had to go to bed. So there's natural ability, but then there's hard work, okay? We can all default to natural ability and be miserable people walking around hurting each other. Or we can learn what's really going on and say, you know what? If I want to be able to get along with other people, I got to be able to get along with myself. If I want to be able to function with other people and love them even though they're flawed. We're all flawed. Get over it. But are you dealing with your flaws and helping other people overcome theirs, or just looking to point everybody else's out? That's what offense does. It's to a man's glory to overlook an offense. One of the things that I started to get into here was that Jesus is the rock of offense. He is the stumbling stone. He's the one that we keep tripping. It's amazing. I don't have any problem with Muhammad. Anybody here have a problem with Muhammad? Have you ever had a problem with Muhammad in your life? Anybody have a problem with Buddha? Anybody ever been confronted with believing in Buddha? But it's amazing what happens when people start getting confronted with believing about Jesus. It just bothers people. You know, they don't use Buddha as a swear word or Muhammad as a swear word. They use Jesus. Isn't that amazing? That's amazing to me. That's just a little, it's society-wide that Jesus Christ is simultaneously praised and honored, and also the name is used as a swear word. It's amazing. And you go, is there something to that? Yes, there's something to that. Because he's the rock of offense. He's in people's faces. Now, I will be the first to tell you that a lot of the motivation, or a lot of the motives that people have are not out of a heart of love. They're trying to condemn and control. And you know, if you died tonight, if you go to hell, how about if I live for the next 50 years? Would I live in purpose, joy, fruit of the Spirit flowing through my life? How about that? But you went right to the fear aspect. So there's a lot of that out there. I understand that. So there's a lot of times that people are very justified in saying, you know what? It's not that I don't like Jesus. I don't like you. You're a negative person trying to tell me that you got it all figured out. And you don't. I understand that. But when you're sitting there at night, when the average person's sitting there at night, laying their head in their bed, it's God, the true God of creation, that they're having a difficulty with. They're trying to understand this, trying to understand that, and it conflicts within them. And this is the reason. Jesus is the stumbling stone. He's the rock of offense. And he wants to get people's attention because he never intended for us to live in misery. He never intended for us to live in pain. But it is a reality of our earth since the fall of man. And he says, so, you know what? if you trip over me, I'm trying to get your attention to show you that there's a better way. There's a way of peace. There's a way of life. There's a way of freedom. I was talking with somebody yesterday, and they were relaying to me a story or a situation in their life and just saying, I'm having a hard time with this person because of this and this and this. And he said, I really want to, respond to what you were saying about this bitterness teaching. And I said, well, it's really simple. It's not always easy, but it's really simple. Bitterness, offense, unforgiveness, it's not about that other person. It's about you. And so I said to them, I said, do you want your heart clean? Do you want your heart pure? Do you want to be able to sleep at night in peace within yourself, no matter what's going on around you? Bitterness is not about them. It's about us. It's about right here inside of me. What's going on inside of me? If I'm supposed to love my neighbor as I love myself, then I got to learn to love myself. And if I'm going to learn to love myself, then I can't be bitter, offended, and hold unforgiveness against myself. I've got to learn, you know what? I can forgive myself. I can say, you know what? I forgive me. Sounds kind of silly, but it works over and over again. But it works like a brick wall. I build this brick wall up of how I failed myself and how I've offended myself, how I've hurt myself, how I did things to other people that I go, why did I do that? I hurt that person. And we can hold it against ourselves, and we can beat ourselves up for it. And it just builds a brick wall. And the way that we start taking that brick wall down is saying, you know what? I forgive myself. I forgive myself. And if I get an opportunity to speak to that person, then I'll say the same thing, that I'm sorry that I did that. But the bottom line is I have to be at peace in here. If I'm not at peace in here, then nothing in my life is going to be at peace. Because I'll either attract that lack of peace to me, or I'll create conflicts in order to have that lack of peace. You ever been just sitting there in a situation and all of a sudden an argument or a confrontation or a situation erupts and you go, why are we even fighting? I did it for years. While the Lord was trying to teach me this. This isn't, I'm giving this message in 4 parts, but it's not a snap your fingers thing and it's done. And again, I don't want anybody to take this message and then go start beating themselves up because they're not getting this concept of offense. Start today, learn today, and grow into it over time. Start today realizing I want to start working on loving myself, overlooking offense, forgiving myself for the failures that I've had, forgiving others for the failures that they've done to me. You know, there are people that hate their parents. There are people that hate their kids. There are people that hate their families for things that have happened, things that haven't happened. That's an amazing one to me. I've dealt with that with several people, and I've had to say, they say, well, you didn't do such and such. And I really needed you to do that at that moment. I have to look at them and go, I'm sorry? I didn't do something you were expecting me to do? You didn't ask me to do it. You didn't say you needed it done. You just were expecting me to automatically do it for you, and it didn't happen, and it bothered you. And I've had to say to this group on a regular occasion, there are specific times that I won't do certain things. I look at every one of you individually. I listen very closely to what the Lord's trying to tell me so that I operate with you individually. So one person, I give them 3 or 4 hugs on a given occasion. And another person, I may give them a half hug. That's all they get. And it doesn't look like people understand it at the surface. They go, why? Why did you do that with that person and not do that with this person? Because I understand their heart. As a leader here, I have to understand the hearts of the people that are here. Shepherds know the condition of your flocks. And what happens is that'll cause offense to come up within certain people. Why did he just do that to that person, didn't do it to me? So you can have a situation where you don't do something and it causes offense. Or you do something and it causes offense. And that's what Jesus did. Jesus knew when to cause offense and when not to cause offense. He knew when to get after somebody and get in their face about something, and he knew when to let it go. When he says, the disciples in Matthew 13 and Mark chapter 6, it says they took offense at him. And Jesus said, only in his own hometown and among his own house is a prophet without honor. The idea, Jesus kept saying, they said, Lord, don't you know that you offended them when you did this? And he said, it was necessary. Why? I wanted them to trip over something so that they'd start looking at where they're walking. They're walking in a religious mindset of fear and control and hurting other people. He said of the Pharisees, you travel the entire world to win one convert. And when you win him, you make him twice as much a son of hell as you are. That's some pretty heavy words. So don't you think he might want to get their attention as to what their motives really are? So he puts in, he says, you know what? I'm going to stand right here so you got to stumble into me. I'm going to get right in your face so you got to stumble into me. You ever had to do that? I've had to do that. You ever had to get in somebody's face and push their buttons so that something comes out of them? And they're angry and they're fighting with you and you just sit there and let them keep stumbling at you. And pretty soon, I've had a sweet, it's horrible at the beginning. Why did you do that with that person? And I've watched it. Now there's been times that it didn't, that they just stumbled and were offended and left. Okay. But I have had those other sweet times, those beautiful times where I had to get in somebody's face and cause them to stumble and cause them to stumble. And we're in this argument and we're dealing with it. And pretty soon they start to see it. They start to see what they're carrying. They start to see that they've got a hurt within them that they have been hanging on to. And they get to a place and they finally go, I got to deal with this, don't I? Yeah. That's the wounds of a friend. Are we willing to get in each other's face and hurt each other a little bit in order to get rid of the bigger hurt? You say, well, I don't completely understand that. You ever had a wound? You ever wiped out or done something and got a whole bunch of gravel and junk in a big wound? You know what? You got to go through and clean that back out, don't you? Does it hurt to clean it out? Do you know up until the last 100, 150 years, they had no other techniques for cleaning it out than just getting in there and digging in it? Nowadays, we get a shot. We numb it so we don't have to feel the pain of them digging it all out. Thank you for modern technology, at least in the Western world. But if you're in a foreign country and they don't have antiseptics or anesthesia or something like that, or something to numb the pain, you're going to feel the whole thing as they clean it out. You're going to feel. Has anybody ever cut themselves and you pour some peroxide on it or some alcohol, some rubbing alcohol? Hurts, don't it? But you have to clean it that way. That's what it's talking about, the wounds of a friend. It's saying, listen, I got to dig this out for you. I was over at my father-in-law's the other day and just working on some stuff, and William was with us. And somehow we discovered that he had a little sliver in his hand. And because he's 3, it was the most sensitive thing to not want to hurt him in order to get the sliver out. But if you leave the sliver in there, it could fester, it could get infected and everything like that. So my father-in-law is going, I want to get this out, William, it might hurt a little bit. And he got part of it, but there was still a piece in there. And it was just so cute knowing William. He's looking at it and he's like, it's still there, just get it out. So even at that little age, he was like, okay, just dig it out. And so he just ended up digging it out. And I was watching this little boy who was like, he already at a root level recognized, yeah, this might hurt a little bit, but there's something bigger going on here. So let it hurt a little bit. And he stood right there just calm and let him pull it out. You know, and the rest of us men are talking about, yeah, all the things that we've done where, yeah, I get a sliver, and if I can't dig it out, I take my razor blade knife and I cut it and pop that puppy out and, pour a little stuff on it and move on, because I know I don't want it to be even worse. Or I get metal slivers every once in a while and they just drive me nuts, and I want to just find that thing and just dig it out, And it's going to hurt digging it out, but it hurts a lot more leaving it in. It could cause more problems. Do you get my point? This is about what we've got to deal with within here. What I've got to deal with. What's going on within me. I want to walk in freedom. I want to walk in peace. I want to walk in joy. So I've got to start within here. It's not about what's going on around me. I've had some times of just peace and joy, and everybody's looking at me going, there's all this stuff going around you. I said, yeah, it's going on outside of me. And I'm speaking to my atmosphere that once this storm's passed, it'll be even better. Offense, resides within us. And the Lord's trying to say, look, if you're causing somebody else to stumble, it'd be better if you had a millstone tied around your neck and thrown into a sea. Why? Because you're not dealing with yourself. You're a miserable person and you're not dealing with your own misery. And in fact, you're inflicting it on the most precious, the most innocent group among us, our children. That's what he was saying. If anyone causes these little ones to offend, it's better if you just take that miserable person and drown them. You say, that's pretty harsh, Jesus is saying that. I mean, it was harsh when he was talking about punishment, right? When we thought it was about punishment. But it's even more harsh when you realize he's talking about, listen, if you don't want to deal with your own stuff, it's better off that you just exit. You go, really? You ever met somebody that doesn't really want to deal with their own stuff? That's what they start thinking about. Isn't it? That's what they start talking about. I'd just rather be out of here. We find it interesting that Jesus would point that out, but no. He's saying, look, this is what happens. We're going to go into the next parts. We're going to deal with some of these other parts of unforgiveness and realizing that unforgiveness is really setting somebody free. And when we're going to get into bitterness, we're going to deal with it. And dealing with the ideas of bitterness. You ever eaten something bitter? What do you want to do with it the minute you eat something bitter? Spit it out. Usually, you eat something bitter and you're like, oh. Or you learn to eat something bitter and you work through it and go, I know this is good for me. We know through study that dandelion greens and dandelion leaves are extremely, in fact, what are they? They're one of the highest nutritional value. They're some of the highest out of all plants. Dandelion greens and dandelion leaves. A weed, yes. They're some of the highest, but they're extremely bitter. There's a parallel there. There's a parable in that idea. Yes, some of the most beneficial things to us can seem to be the most bitter. One of the things the Lord made the children of Israel do was eat during the Passover. Yeah, they would eat bitter herbs to remind them of the bitterness in Egypt. And what he was saying was, don't get back into that same slavery. And if you study the history of the Israelites, you would find that they continually put themselves back into slavery through disobedience. They continually would just be conquered by this king and conquered by that king and then cry out to God and he'd bring them back in their land. And then they would get into disobedience and doing their own thing and then he'd incite this king and they'd come after him and put him into bondage. And they'd be led into captivity into Babylon and led into captivity into Syria and led into captivity over here and somebody else would conquer them. And even when Jesus came in his time, they were in captivity to the Romans. They were being controlled all this time. And he's saying, I tried to get you during the Passover to eat these bitter herbs so you would remember what it's like. It would remind you of the bitterness and you wouldn't go back into a place of bitterness. So there are little things around us trying to remind us, don't do that. Don't get into that bitter place. And I'm going to talk about those things in bitterness. Do you guys have some stuff? Pastor Ken's over there feverishly writing.
When you were talking about how it's a sliver, you get a sliver and everything like that, when you let it stay in there a long time, that area of your body just becomes super sensitive. And most of us have let all these slivers stay in our life so long that we're real sensitive in the area, and that's why we jump on anybody else. That's why we're so quick.
It's that stick. It's literally that stick angry. To spring the whole trap. Yeah, the trigger.
And the longer we leave it in there, the more infected it becomes. That's why he uses that scripture. You know, if your hand causes you sin, cut it off. Because it's been infected so much, the whole thing needs to come out. It's no longer just a sliver in your finger.
Right.
But the reason, like you said, the reason Jesus is there is to point those things out to us. So offense, when we feel offended about something, that's actually something we can look at as an opportunity of Jesus putting that stumbling before us. We're stumbling over him and saying, okay, I need to pull this out.
Yeah.
It's going to hurt, but I need to pull it out.
Yeah.
And it's something in us that we can recognize as, okay, this is an area. I'm offended, but that's good because this is an area that I can clean up.
Yeah.
That I can repair and clean up.
Absolutely. Reminds me of, I was remembering it earlier, but it continues to remind me. There was a man many years ago. He was a song leader. They would have the orchestra, and he would do the song, and he had this large baton that he would carry. And I don't know what it was pride or arrogance, but whatever, he would have the whole orchestra there, and instead of having the orchestra play, he would take his baton and he would tap it and literally tap out the song with his baton on the stage floor instead of actually having the musicians play. But he was so well renowned and famous that they would let him do it. Seems kind of stupid and looks really prideful. The point is, one time during doing this, he actually hit himself on the foot with his baton and smashed part of his foot. He didn't deal with it. He got gangrene and he died. And it's just I go, wow. He smacked himself on the foot. He was so prideful. You could see it on the stage. He didn't deal with his own injury that he caused himself. I mean, because you say, I injured myself when I was doing this thing and not letting the orchestra play. That would be kind of humbling for him. So he ended up dying of gangrene because he wouldn't deal with his own. Isn't that amazing to us? Instead of dealing with, and then I think of animals. Do you know if a fox or something like that gets caught in a trap out in the woods? They will literally chew their own leg off to get out of it. Now that's got to hurt, man. I watched that movie 127 Hours with James Franco. Mm-hmm. He had to literally cut his own, the real life character, the real person based on a real story, had to literally cut his own arm off because it was wedged between a rock and a hard place. With a dull knife, yes. Amazing.
No chance to sharpen that one.
But it was either I cut this off or I die. And that's literally the point that some of us get to with offense and bitterness and unforgiveness within us. It's literally, in order to keep from stumbling, I got to get rid of this thing. And it's figurative, obviously. I don't expect anybody to hack themselves, you know. We're not getting into cutting ourselves, you know. We're talking about within our soul, dealing with things. Pastor Ken, do you have?
I was just going to say, as you were teaching, I realized a couple people in my own life that are offended. Mm-hmm. And I know the teaching is more about us.
Oh, absolutely.
Focusing on ourselves, but at the same time, as leaders / ministers,
yeah,
you know, we need to be able to see, recognize if someone's offended. Of course, listen to the Lord on it, but, you know, what a huge help that would be as a minister to be able to recognize when someone is offended and, you know, be able to speak to them about it.
Well, isn't it a much more effective thing to say to somebody, the reason you're reacting to me the way you are is because you're offended within yourself, than to just tell them that they're this or tell them they're that or just get into an argument with them. So yeah, there's absolutely the other side. Today I was dealing with us within, but yeah, as leaders, we really have to become so effective within ourselves that we know what our we're offending people on purpose, when we're not offending people, when we're doing things and operating in general. We're not going to ever be perfect in it. But so that we can then come to people and say, do you know the reason you're reacting this way to me is because you're offended within yourself? And that'll be a challenge to a lot of people, but you just have to trust the Lord. Like you said, listen to the Lord and go, all right, Lord, I know you're telling me to point this out right now because you want to get this person set free, so I'm going to deal with the repercussions. You've made me strong enough to deal with the repercussions of this, and we're going to go forward in it. Is that it?
When I looked up gangrene, a serious, potentially life-threatening condition that arises when a considerable mass of body tissue dies. It reminded me of we become dull.
Yes.
And this may occur after an injury or an infection, or in people suffering from any chronic health problem affecting blood circulation. So it's actually when you're cut off from the blood.
Yeah.
that part starts to die and you become numb to it after a while.
Are the parallels amazing when you start digging into them? And it all goes back to this idea, I got to deal with what's in here. You know? We always want to, that's part of a weakness of this culture, of a Western culture, is we want to be amused and entertained. Why? So we don't have to deal with what's going on in here. I want to just space out and not pay attention and just not have to deal with this stuff.
I think it's interesting, the primary cause of gangrene is reduced blood supply, not no blood supply.
Just reduced.
Just reduced. So you slowly move away from that blood that's cleansed you. Mm-hmm. And that being into the vine.
Right.
And you're still getting that juice from the vine.
It's being restricted.
Than what you've been getting.
Yeah. Wow. Amazing stuff. So get ready for part 3. We're going to talk about unforgiveness.